Another game that I'm very interested in this weekend is Texans-Vikings, a team that I think is very much in the mix for Super Bowl contention in Houston, obviously, and a team that is playing great defense led by Brian Flores and getting very good quarterback play out of a guy that has surprised a lot of people this year. And Thomas Sam Darnold is not the only quarterback for whom that is true. I think one of the most fascinating storylines that's emerged thus far this season is the number of quarterbacks on their second, third, fourth teams that are playing well and leading their teams to wins. It's Darnold, it's Baker, it's Geno, it's Carr, who was somewhat unceremoniously shown the door in Las Vegas and did not overwhelm us last year in his first year in New Orleans. This year, he looks like a new guy. And so I want to talk about what this means for team building. The fact that literally, as a number one draft pick is being sent to the bench, we are seeing others who have been benched emerge as viable options. I'd love to explore on today's episode of the SumerSports Show the lessons that we could learn from this, if there are any, in terms of evaluation, development, roster building, when a roster is ready to draft a quarterback, and when it might do best with a guy who maybe has less upside long-term, but has more experience. I'm wondering, just to start us off, where do your thoughts go when you see quarterbacks like the ones I already named playing well?
First of all, I think it's great for the league, right? I feel like there were times there, and especially during the times that I was sitting in that GM seat, where names would surface and you'd say, well, do we bring him in as a deuce just in case Matt Ryan gets hurt? We never really did that. We did it a little bit here and there. We had some good players that were legitimate number twos. But when you looked at number ones that weren't working out, initially, I felt like a lot of us were cashing out on them a little bit too early. At least I will raise my hand. I did more than I should have during that time, thinking, let's analyze this a lot closer. Let's look at the personnel. Let's look at the scheme. Let's look at the coaches. Let's look at the leadership. Let's look at the ownership. I mean, we talk about the ownership situation and even our discussion about stability and instability, as we mentioned, with Carolina at this point with a young quarterback, how that affects those quarterbacks, right? We've seen a lot of quarterbacks not work well early on, and a lot of quarterbacks fail altogether. Why now, which we're going to get into, why are there more now that are kind of hitting stride? I feel like maybe there's more sort of study going into and formatting, so to speak, going into, we're going to bring this guy in as a deuce, but he is still talented. He still possesses what I continue to say, the requisite traits. I've said that before, even about Bryce Young. Those guys aren't losing that until they get older and they truly are losing it. That's a different situation. When you're in your mid-30s, you may be losing some of that. So I just feel like putting a person in that spot and knowing that they are there to step up, that's what they were doing for. That's why they brought Sam Darnold in there. That's why the quarterbacks are there as a number two, right? In my mind. I mean, it was Gardner Minshew that? I don't know if he was. Was he really that? I don't know when he was brought in to different teams. Where was he? Andy Dalton. I mean, we're talking about Andy Dalton, right?
Right.
So I know we're going to get there. My point on all of this is I just feel like this group is being a lot more mindful. It's not easy to get quarterbacks. And oh, by the way, there are still injuries in this league, like legitimate concussions that come out. Snapped Achilles tendons, et cetera. You better cover your bases if you are the right team builder, and your owner wants to see that. That's important.
Yeah. What are you said requisite traits. What are the requisite traits to try and salvage a quarterback? Like, how do you know which ones you're like, this one isn't going to work, I'm not even going to double back on this, but this guy over here maybe is worth a little bit of extra time?
Well, let's first start by saying you need a quarterback that's going to come in and not be an a-hole, right? You need a legitimate enough leader that's not going to turn your group upside down. We've seen them before without mentioning names. There's some guys out there that were really good football players, but weren't the leaders that you truly needed. That needs to be there. Even if you're bringing them in as a deuce that might have to step up and be your one, you don't want a pain in the ass, egomaniacal first or top 10 pick who's going to come into your building and turn things upside down.
Maybe especially if you're thinking about them in that kind of a role, because you also need somebody who could step on the field, but also is the right type of personality to potentially mentor a younger quarterback who's the franchise's priority.
Well, no, there's no question about that. So we lead with leadership not only because it is so important. That guy could have a gun of an arm. he could run like the wind and do all these great things. But if he is not one that's going to lead that group correctly, if he has elements of some of the guys in the past, I mean, I know that, Cam has reached out and been very outspoken that he wants to go to places, but there are obviously certain teams out there who will be hesitant because of what we're talking about right now.
Mhm.
Obviously, he led certain ways when the time was to lead, and they won a lot of games. But is that where he is now? I think that's where some of the hesitancy is, right? So
Yeah.
I just think that's the kickoff place for me to start, to make sure that you have the right person in the right building with the right people.
What would that look like in terms of if you're a general manager and you are looking for, the way that we're built right now, it makes sense to go get a guy like this to bring them in, whether it's because we drafted somebody, but we're not sure if they're going to be ready right away, or we need a bridge quarterback. We just don't have a draft pick, whatever the case may be. Are you calling around to people who have worked with that quarterback in the past? Are you like, what does the process look like? Are you scouring through specific stats? Are you watching for specific things on tape? Are you making phone calls about their personality, their leadership style, stuff like that?
Yeah, there's no question. I mean, that happens a lot. Just to finish off in the leadership area, you are calling around. You're calling around to your contemporaries out around the league that you have good relationships with, which, by the way, we haven't gotten into this, but how important that is. Back in the day, way back, you could screw another GM, and it doesn't matter if you screwed him on a trade. I think the smart people in this league, they're still about themselves. They're still about being number one and winning, but they have to do it in the right way, their dealings in the NFL, because of things like this. To be able to call other GMs regarding where this player might have been, calling other people that in the scouting world have dealt with him, calling other coaches that quarterback coaches that he has in fact worked with. What are the positives? What are the challenges that this quarterback may have? And most people in this league, if you have a good relationship and you handle yourself well, will share proper information. No one wants to go out there and share something erroneous and then all of a sudden come back and it snaps them in the face. On the positive side too, right? Oh no, he's great, he's perfect. And then all of a sudden it's not that way and you find it out, then that can come back to haunt. So I think that is one of the things you definitely dig into. You also dig into all the reports. A lot of those guys aren't going to have changed, right? They came out of college a certain way. They might have changed and grown up and matured. I mean,
Mhm.
look, there were reports when Jordan Love came out that he wasn't the leader that he was probably expected to be. He seems as though he's a much more sound leader. He admits to it, right? He's grown. That's an important thing. There are some of these guys, though, whoever have come out leading and being leaders coming out of their college programs and they get into the NFL. We've seen it recently, and they just start swirling a little bit and they've
Yep.
lost their way a little bit. They're nowhere near in the big stage. They're nowhere near leading how they could lead, right? And that gets complicated, right? With some of these people. There I am saying right again. It does get complicated, Lindsay. And some of those people that you thought were top-notch leaders are more midline leaders. They may be bitching and moaning a little bit more than you want. And then that is a very quick way of losing the team when you have some tough times, because you want the team to be behind you as a quarterback when things get a little dusty. And that's a quick way for people to jump off board when they're around a guy that's a prick, called the way
It
it is.
also it also strikes me just in general that there is a natural maturation that happens when people get older and a little bit more settled in their careers. Whether you've had success or not in the first few years, unless that just completely like warps your brain and your confidence is shot and you think I can't do this anymore, and then that probably leads to you exiting stage left. But if you stick with it and you think I can do this, um, everything would slow down after a while, whether you even have a ton of experience on the field or not. I mean, in the case of Sam Darnold, he has a ton of experience on the field. He's seen everything that you could possibly see. So over time, regardless of whether or not he's had success with those things, processing speed is going to, everything's going to slow down for him and he's going to be able to make smart decisions at the line. He knows what he's looking at. And I think that there's so much value in that.
You hit the nail on the head there, and that's where I was going to go next. So you come in with the leadership idea back to requisite traits, Lindsay, and then you start talking about where is he on the processing side? Where is he truly on the mental side to be able to leave another system and go to another system, or leave 2 or 3 systems and end up in another system? We would do a lot of research on that, because if you don't have the leadership ability and, again, the mental ability to process and decision make, and you're errant in that world and that approach to your game, I don't care if you still have a very strong arm, or if you still have the athleticism to move around and make plays, it's going to be short-lived. You have to be the ideal. You have to be adept enough to process and to decision make. Otherwise, you bring them in and you're just throwing games that you think you can pull off with an adequate or good quarterback. He doesn't have to be the top-notch quarterback. So that's where I'd go next on requisite traits.
Do you think that these players that we're talking about here were capable of playing this way back then? If the situation that they were in had been better for them, could they have been viable starters, or are we seeing them benefit from what we're talking about here, the confidence that comes with age and experience?
I think there's a confidence that comes with age and experience. I think there's also a drive and a passion about and a perseverance about them, and how they want to continue to show to the very end what they are. I mean, I know we're going to be jumping around, but Baker Mayfield, I read an article recently where he was told by Jason Light and head coach and group there, right? Todd Bowles, you come in here and be yourself after Tom Brady was here. Bring the levity that you have and the personality that you have, because that's what that organization needs. I think there might be a little bit more of that. I thought that was a fascinating article, thinking about, Sam Darnold coming to a place where, let's settle in and be who you are. Otherwise, if you try to be someone that you're not, back to the mental and the leadership side, then I think you're force feeding it. And I don't think that works very well. So I think those two parts of what we're talking about, along with maturity, along with a new place, a fresh start, is very important. Sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. Of course, our guy, Matt Ryan, when he went up to Indianapolis in a different way, that didn't pan out for a number of reasons.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that's an interesting point, because part of that might have had to do with, I mean, there are cliffs, right? In terms of specific physical traits that people have at every different position. And so was it because of that? Was it because the environment just wasn't like, maybe he wasn't adaptable, maybe they weren't doing things the way that he wanted to, they just didn't feel comfortable. I mean, there's a number of different things. Or was the situation bad the way that it was early on for guys like Sam Darnold? And that's an interesting example, almost in reverse, right? Because you look at Sam Darnold and you say, like I have said for years, and his situation's glaring. And honestly, you could make this argument for a number of the other guys that we're talking about here today too. But I just thought his was so glaring that, like, the O-line was bad that he was behind. Some of the coaching decisions were bad enough to get them fired. That didn't necessarily just have to do with Sam Darnold's play. Sometimes the wide receiver core that he was working with wasn't particularly good. And I know he had DJ Moore, but like, what else, So there's so much that goes into these environments that leads to somebody having success or not. But Matt Ryan on the back end is actually an interesting way to discuss that part of the conversation.
Oh, yeah. And I would say, to your point there, a little aside, I don't think a lot of people know this, right? Everyone thinks, okay, the quarterback coach that comes into that organization or is in place, everyone thinks, oh, that's such a prime position. You're going to pay him millions of dollars to deal with that quarterback. If you have a very adept and strong-willed offensive coordinator, he really becomes the quarterback coach as well, right? The quarterback whisperer. Yes, you have a quarterback coach. That guy is often overshadowed when you have the strong man in that spot. If you don't, however, and you make the mistake thinking that you have, I'm saying as an organization, that you have a strong coordinator who can handle the quarterback, and then you bring in, and this has happened before, I've been around it, you bring in a quarterback coach who's a young guy in the totem pole. Hey, I like this guy. He's going to be a good quarterback coach. Let's pay him okay. Let's let him get indoctrinated. And all of a sudden, the quarterback and the meeting room, which is vital, is not always together with the coordinator, and they're relying on a quarterback coach who is a neophyte in the business. You can get some negative repercussions off of that. It's another topic of conversation, but it's really important to make sure, just like I said, the O-line coaches are so important to develop on the team, right? For your offense to develop. You need to make sure you have a quarterback coach that knows what he's doing, and he's respected enough by the quarterbacks, even the veteran quarterbacks like Aaron Rodgers and such. If you have a lame-o in that position, just call it the way it is, that's complicated for the football team. Can I also say this very quickly as we're talking about traits? So you talk about the mental that we're talking about, the leadership. You're also talking about, okay, I want to make sure that this guy's coming in. I'm going to put my scouting hat on right now, and I'm going to go snap to whistle, right? When I start thinking, can the cat still get back? Can he move? Can he get back? Can he ad-lib in the pocket properly, right? And can he get the damn ball
Mhm.
off in 2.5 seconds or whatever number we'd like him to get it off in? If he's not, and he's playing around in the 2.8s, 9s, and that's what his MO is, and you don't have the strong O line, you need to make some decisions off of that. They have to be able to move appropriately. They don't have to be what they were when they were necessarily 22, but they still have to be able to get out of their issues and avoid when they need to avoid. So that is an important thing. And then of course that pitch, leading into, if this cat doesn't have accuracy as that quarterback, like if he's lost his accuracy, I'd say short and intermediate. Deep ball accuracy, I think you can deal with that a little bit, but that accuracy thing is really, really important, not only for the game winning side of it all, but it's another thing that builds on morale in your team. Your team will be pulling their hair out, which evidently they probably have with Bryce Young, right? Where I read that there was potential mutiny if the head coach, if Canales didn't take care of that. You don't think that is a pit in your stomach as team builders, as a GM, of course, and a head coach. So I think the accuracy thing is my next thought on that, just to stay in line with what we're talking about.
Yeah, which is I mean, it's an interesting way to look at the Panthers too, like putting Andy Dalton back in there. The line for this week's game moved by 2 points in the direction of the Panthers. And nobody thinks that long term Andy Dalton has more upside than Bryce Young, but in the immediate future, I think most people think that the Panthers probably have a better chance to win. I don't even know that that is a question that most people are even entertaining, right? Like Andy Dalton clearly is going to make this team a better team in the short term. It's just whether or not that's a worthwhile if he's going to make them better enough that it's worth it to make them the move, right? Like that's probably where the decision lied for the Panthers, because I have no doubt that he's going to unlock Deontay Johnson in a way that Bryce Young couldn't in the short term. I wouldn't be surprised if the Panthers didn't keep that game this weekend very, very close and or win it.
So I was talking, I completely agree with you on all of that. And I start thinking about, you look at the immediate, and it's everything to do with what we're talking about: leadership, decision-making, movement, accuracy, et cetera, right? Production in big time moments. Does that quarterback, does that number 2, who might be the number 1, have they shown any ability to thrive when it really gets really messy and it's a big time play calling and big time ability on the line? That's what obviously is a difference maker, right? If you don't have that, and you have a reputation for, heaving the ball up and throwing the ball away. I mean, maybe at times people felt that with Carson Wentz, right? He had all these other traits, but in the end, was he winning the game? Was he throwing the decision-making ball that should not have been thrown? We don't even need to get into this right now, but when you think of Will Levis, is he showing traits of that? Which, coming out, he had all these other abilities, but that's one of the things that was kind of hanging out there. Again, not to get off on a tangent there. But those are really, really important things. And Lindsay, last thing I'll say is, you have to look at that when you're dealing with that and making that decision as a GM, the head coach, and the owner, and you're really stepping back organizationally. Will this person fit in? Will he rub the starting quarterback who might come back or will come back, hopefully after an injury? How will that all play out, right? How will that all play out? Mariota came into to Atlanta, and great guy, great person, right? It fell off the edge. Obviously, he was emotional. He left. There were things that he did that was not probably in the end the right decision. Now they had a quarterback there that probably wasn't the right quarterback to lead the team. Of course, we know that. Sorry.
We're listing off a ton of different younger quarterbacks who are having trouble in a variety of different ways. Like we alluded to the Colts, and Anthony Richardson is another guy who is really struggling in a lot of ways. And we love the traits. I mean, I think he's one of the most exciting quarterbacks in the NFL to watch play, because it can always be a big play with his legs, or it can always be a big play with his arm. But I also am not confident that he can make the easy throws that we're talking about that you need to be able to make consistently. So I'm wondering, because there's so many of these guys who we really want to develop, and you feel like this could work. And we're seeing examples right and left, like we're talking about here, of guys that when they are able to take a step back and take a breath, and then they can come back and play, now they are more competent when they actually do see the field. So I'm wondering if maybe there's a flaw in the system somewhere. Is there a way that we could create an environment if we were to just like completely like make whatever rule we want, or, add like a taxi squad spot or something, whatever it is that where you didn't have to play these quarterbacks right away? Like, is there a way that we could create an environment where teams could better protect their investments at quarterback so they didn't have to cut bait, and then watch them go on and have success with a different team?
Well, you'd like that to be the case, Lindsay. I mentioned this in another show and another time. If you're not given the endorsement by your owner to the GM, you won't ever get it as much as a head coach, right? Nowadays, 2 and 3 years in of errant play as a team, you're out the door. You might get a second opportunity as a GM to hire another head coach and to pick and acquire another quarterback, but it is so much more not for long now. So I would say, for an organization, a head coach and a general manager to commit to putting someone on the bench for 3 or 4 years like they did in Green Bay, a lot of us love that idea. The general managers, former or current, they love the idea of being able to do what Tom Brady said, right? What's going on here? We're not giving these guys enough time. But I don't think that is the case in today's world. It is such a quick turnover. And I don't think that the ownership groups is open to thinking about, okay, let's take 5 years and really grow here, right? You're getting a lot of different people owning teams. It's not the old situation where it was all family owned, long-standing ownership. We have a lot of really talented, smart businessmen who are taking over teams now, and they are results oriented. Year 1, year 2, if not, they probably go to the spot like, let's turn this over, right? We see it in the European soccer league. It's crazy the turnover now in the NCAA. More and more of that now. So you could suggest it might be a system thing. Again, if you're a GM and you're running that, the last thing you want to think is putting that quarterback on the bench and not developing him for 4 years when you're being judged off of what you did with your pick at quarterback. And all of a sudden your contract comes up and he's still not ready going into the 3rd and 4th year. Your owner is now looking at you saying, I thought I was judging you about the whole package. I get it. But as I've said before, I am judging you to start with how you're picking this head coach, if you are involved at that level, and more importantly, how you're picking the quarterback. And if you're flailing on your quarterback pick and he's not playing well, it just doesn't play into the fact that you would like to take a lot of time and develop that quarterback, is what I'm saying. It's just a complicated measure.
How do we use all of this to better evaluate the quarterbacks coming out? Like you talk about, if you're not hitting on your quarterbacks, and I wonder how many teams, if we came up with a list here, have hit on their quarterbacks right out of the gate. There's usually a period of time, even in the case of Josh Allen, where it looked like it was a disaster for a minute and then it turned. And so how much time do you have to metabolize that disaster period before it does turn? And how much patience do you have built in? It was fine with Patrick right out of the gate. It was certainly fine with CJ Stroud out of the gate. I'm trying to think of other guys that have hit the ground running without any problems, right? Even Caleb Williams right now looks like, oh, this is a reminder. This is what it normally looks like with rookies. And we got a little ahead of ourselves thinking that he was just going to be able to step right in and not, operate the way that most humans who are transitioning to the NFL operate. It seems like most of these quarterbacks go through a growth period and struggle with that transition.
And everyone understands that. Again, it's just not a 3, 4, 5 year period where they can just continue to ease in, right? The Boo Birds come out quickly. The owner has expectations. He's knocking on the door of the GM and the head coach, like, what's going on here? I thought we moved up, we traded, we spent a lot of money, whether it was acquisition or whether it was a draft pick. You look at Herbert and you look at Lawrence, right? I mean, where are you with those guys? In general, they are very talented football players, right? And those teams, they're riding on that, right? They're riding on, of course, 2 running backs at each of the places, right? Jacksonville and the Chargers, who can tote the rock well and ease up a little bit on the quarterback. My point on all of this is, how much is your organization willing to spend the time and have the patience and understand? Give David Tepper his due on this. That is not a big time are an easy decision. It's a big time decision to make as the owner. And for him, probably, I'm not answering for David Tepper, but a man that smart in the business world, in the trading world, in the trading spectrum, will move hundreds of millions of dollars of stock right now. And then 20 minutes later, he might lose on it. And then, an hour later, he's making 500 million on something else, right? A lot of those decisions are made. I'm not saying in any way he's mercurial or haphazard with what he did. I think he understands you have to cut your losses now. And is cutting your losses benching a guy, or is it trading, as we alluded to the other day with some of that conversation?